three of them that arise in the accommodations area. First is zoning and restrictions on short-term rentals that impact neighborhoods and neighbors. Dave, what challenges do these restrictions place on hosts, and how should they be tailored? How should these restrictions be tailored? And what is Airbnb doing to try to address the sorts of concerns like noisy neighbors that may arise?
Sure. So again, I think we get right into that difference between people doing this once in a while in their own home and people who do this for a living, whether it's multiple listings in a building, multiple listings throughout a city, or just doing it round the clock, even in one listing. I think if you look at what's really happening out there, most of these people do it once in a while. We feel pretty strongly that that's not a business, and so if it's a residential zoned area and someone is renting out their apartment when they're away on vacation for a week a year, that shouldn't change and doesn't change the nature of that listing, and I think many cities have agreed with that around the world. It certainly makes us a little nervous when it's hard to define, and it's basically these zoning laws may be on the books for 100 years, and only now are governments trying to figure out whether to apply them to roomers and boarders who are there for a week. They haven't before, but with pressure maybe they will. And so we are working hard to make the laws clear and to work with governments to make the laws clear. We've advocated pretty consistently around the world for a few years now just to exempt people in their primary and maybe in some circumstances secondary homes. We don't argue that people should be able to have 50 listings. We've said you should increase the penalties and enforcement on people who are doing this as a business without a license. The question is people who are doing this when it's not a business, and once in a while, how do we get those people exempted from either the short-term rental laws, zoning laws, in some cases laws that have nothing to do with any of this that were passed 80 years ago for some other random reason might apply to short-term rentals, and we're just trying to clear that path. We're in 34,000 cities. We have, I think, 1 million listings now around the world. It's not easy to address every single one of those at once, but we are working really hard to do as many as we can.
Let me ask you one other before I ask Vanessa. Another one that's pretty important to cities, which is the local government's interest in tax collection, and what your approach to that is in terms of where you step in and, well, I guess, collect and pay taxes on somebody else's behalf.
Sure. Yeah. So we've, for a long time, I'll just take this country since we're in this country, we offer 1099s, and so all income earned on Airbnb, we offer the tax forms for. There are separate transient occupancy taxes, hotel taxes, sales taxes. In New York, I think it's, between 4 and 6 taxes, depending on who you are and what you're doing. In New York City, it's very complicated for hosts to understand whether they owe anything, and in cases where they think they owe something, to pay it. So we went through a couple years of just trying to figure out how to help and what to do. We don't always think that the tax is owed because someone doing this a week a year is not a hotel, but we've said pretty clearly if a city thinks it's owed or a state thinks it's owed, we want to help collect and remit it. We are doing so, I think, in Portland and San Francisco, in a couple of other cities. We offered, as I said, to do it in New York. There's a law that prevents us from doing so right now because we're not the proper party to collect the tax. We've asked for a simple change in the law, and as I said, the hotel lobbyists came out and said, please don't let them change that law. We don't want them to pay taxes all of a sudden. So we're in this weird world of a company that wants to collect and remit more tax. In New York, it would be about $65 million a year right now. We can't figure out how to do it, but I think we'll get there. It's hard to see how governments will continue to say we don't want this money. But that's our position worldwide. We're going to as many jurisdictions as fast as we can to strike agreements on understanding what the tax is, who we're going to give it to, and collecting and remitting it, as much to prevent our hosts from having to deal with this as anything. But we want to also, embrace and help cities that we're in. So.
Do you have any sense of how much of the total revenue is taxed on Airbnb? Host-generated revenue?
I don't. Again, in New York, it would be 14 or so % if we were allowed to collect and remit it. So,
Vanessa.
Great. Well, on the tax issue, it's great that Airbnb is collecting tax in certain jurisdictions, but again, from the hotel perspective, we don't get to pick and choose what jurisdictions we pay taxes in or where we collect and remit occupancy or sales tax from the guests that stay in our rooms and in our hotels. And that tax revenue is important to the communities, where the tax revenue is collected, providing them with the resources they need to provide the various services. And I would go back to the zoning issue for a second too. Again, I would give just the hotel perspective. When a hotel is built in any community, those neighbors are aware of the project and they have an opportunity to make their concerns known and have them addressed. Hotels are built in commercial areas. In contrast, I think of a family who buys an apartment in a big city like New York or Los Angeles. They don't expect that living next door to them and next door to their apartment, they are going to have folks coming and going every day or a couple times a week. That's not what they signed up for. A revolving door of strangers is not what they signed up for. But increasingly, as a result of Airbnb and other new market players that facilitate these rentals, that's occurring. We hear countless stories of that happening. I think New York is ground zero. I don't think we're talking about the individual who rents out his or her home a few times a year. That's been happening for decades. What we're talking about is large commercial interests basically creating rogue hotels and skirting the common sense rules, regulations, and privacy rights.
Great. Sorry, please.
I just want to say, so I mean, if you listen carefully, it sounds to me like we're agreeing, right? I mean, we are also not talking about rogue hotels or defending rogue hotels or a law passed to do anything other than punish rogue hotels. We are talking about trying to get a law that allows people to do this once in a while, and we can't get that done. And I think that's why I have so much hope. It's a little frustrating right now because we seem to always be arguing against each other while agreeing at the same time. But that's why I have hope that this is going to work, because we really only want, I think, the same thing, which is we want to collect this tax. Although it's a little interesting, you say you can't choose when and where to collect and remit tax, but you are actually choosing not to let us collect and remit tax in New York right now, your industry. We'd love it if we could do that and be on the level playing field that you discussed. So I think we basically agree, so maybe we'll get there. Maybe not today, maybe tomorrow.
I would just add one point on New York. I think from our perspective, different states and cities are going to decide what is best for them in terms of how to protect their communities and in dealing with these rules. And in New York, it's illegal for a short-term online rental. In Santa Monica, they passed a law that allows for home sharing, but you have to have a license and pay occupancy tax, but it doesn't allow for rentals if you're not home. So different cities and states are going to address it differently for in their best interests.
Gotcha. I also want to mention that there was actually several comments that came in discussing the impact of Airbnb on the stock of affordable housing, expressing concerns about that. And so I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that and what Airbnb's view is regarding its impact on affordable housing, in New York City in particular.
Sure. So look, our company was founded in 2008 by a couple of people who couldn't pay their rent. They're incredibly familiar with what it's like to live in a city that's unaffordable. They hosted people on their floor on air mattresses during a convention because they could not make their rent. They are very concerned about this. It's why I think the company has succeeded over time and why so many people open up their own homes on Airbnb, because they need that money to make the rent. And so as a company founded and sort of increasingly dependent on people who are doing this, at least at first, to earn a little extra money to stay in their homes, we're incredibly concerned about the impact we would have on cities, and we look into this all the time. We would not want to be a company that drives up rent or decreases supply. We've commissioned studies. We've looked into this issue at length. It's pretty clear we don't have that impact, certainly not a significant impact, if any. There are a lot of market forces right now in big cities like New York, rent control, rent regulation, people making more money, people moving into cities, cities becoming much safer, attractive places to live, that are driving up rents enormously. And I recently moved to New York, and I can attest to that. It's impossible to find a place. If you look at the percentage of what Airbnb, even taken to its extreme, growing sort of to infinity right now, would impact rents, it's still very small. That said, if you're in your own home renting out a couple of weeks a year, you could not possibly be taking housing off the market. Just by definition, you're in your home, you're staying in your home, and that's actually good for affordability. If people are increasingly, for instance, if we heard that someone had an entire building on Airbnb and they were transactioning short-term and taking housing off the market and driving down supply, even if we thought that wouldn't impact the overall cost because it's such a small number, we're concerned about it. So.
Okay, great. And I'm going to ask Ashwini and Matt